Welcome everybody. My name is Jen McCain and I'm the Vice Chair of Friends of Ruby. And I'd be remiss if I didn't first deliver a little bit of a message from the Executive Director, Carol Osler, who's not able to be with us today, but she did want me to read this to everybody here. February 22nd is Canada's first ever National Chosen Family Day. Named for the family that we choose, this day is to recognize and celebrate the valued relationships between friends and allies in the LGBTQI2S community. Friends of Ruby is proud to launch Chosen Family Day to raise awareness of the challenges faced by LGBTQI2S youth and to celebrate existing chosen families who help them through these challenges. For LGBTQI2S youth who come out, family rejection can have devastating consequences on their mental health, career prospects, and safety. They are 14 times more likely to attempt suicide and engage in substance abuse than their heterosexual peers. These youth are also overrepresented amongst Toronto's homeless and precariously housed population, with 25 to 40% identifying as LGBTQI2S. For those who haven't yet found their chosen family, Friends of Ruby is here to provide support and housing when they need it most. I'd like to thank our panelists and all of you for joining us today and hope you have a great time celebrating with your chosen families tomorrow. With these words, we now declare the first Saturday after Family Day in Canada as Chosen Family Day, starting tomorrow, February 22nd. And now... So before we start, I'd like to introduce all of our panelists here. So starting from your right, we have Lucy Gallo, who is the Director of Youth Services and Housing at Friends of Ruby. They are a member of the community and started their journey at Friends of Ruby as a clinical counselor supporting the mental health of the youth here. We have Kristyn Wong-Tam, who's elected counselor for Ward 13, Toronto Centre in 2010. She's been an activist for the LGBTQI2S and Asian community issues and instrumental to the Friends of Ruby Emergency and Transitional House opening this summer. Thank you for that. Then we have Dr. Jill Andrew, who's a Canadian politician and the first Black queer elected MPP. She represents the electoral district of Toronto St. Paul's. And prior to her election to the legislature, Dr. Jill Andrew was a public speaker, an activist, and co-founded the group Body Confidence Canada. Then we have none other than Mr. Ed Clark, who's the chair of the Friends of Ruby, and I have the privilege to be his vice chair. And he supported the organization as a major donor since its inception. And he is the former president and CEO of TD Bank Group. And is also a significant philanthropist and strong ally to the community. And then we have Mitzie Hunter, who is an MPP for the Toronto riding of Scarborough-Guildwood and candidate for the 2020 Ontario Liberal Party leadership election.
We're really impressed with that.
And prior to that, she served as a member of cabinet in the government of Kathleen Wynne as the Minister of Education. So, introducing our panelists, everyone. So, kind of open up the floor. I want to ask you, Lucy, first, having been a member of Friends of Ruby for a long time, or since its inception, why do you think it's so important to celebrate Chosen Family Day?
Well, my experience here has been that a lot of the youth that come to us experience family rejection, which then leads to increased mental health struggles, homelessness, precariously housed. We had a youth that came in and was experiencing, their family had rejected them due to their identity. And after some time, they started to talk about their brother. And I thought, oh, they must have reconnected with their brother. But what they were saying was, no, it's not my biological brother, it's my street brother, it's my chosen family brother. So often, these are the stories that come. And I feel like having an actual day that can celebrate it for folks who maybe haven't found their chosen family yet, that we can acknowledge a day where people could start to come and build and connect with us and then create a chosen family.
Can I ask Lucy to tell people the story of Ruby?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to talk about that later.
Ruby is part of this chosen family.
Yes.
Ruby is part of this chosen family. So actually, Ruby started coming because I was doing rentals at my house, and I needed a place for Ruby to come hang out, and I knew that we were a pet-friendly, welcoming family. And it started to become apparent that Ruby was not just here to leave my place, but that she became part of youth's family and connection. And then one story I think that's so touching that I've shared before is we had a youth that had difficulty connecting, was rejected from their family, wasn't engaging at all, was very angry, was not speaking to anyone, and we were actually all at a loss on how to support this youth. And I was in a meeting in our tiny little 290 boardroom, and this youth opens the doors and asked for Ruby, and just was like, Ruby. And I said, oh, you're wanting Ruby? Okay, so I got up and brought Ruby to this youth, and this youth sat sort of always in the back and never connected in the drop-in with everyone. And then this happened every day. Every day this youth was asking for Ruby and would sit with Ruby and then hug Ruby and connect with Ruby. And then as time went on, the youth started to engage, would get up, would go and get food, would start to engage in counseling if Ruby was part of the counseling sessions. So this is, Ruby then became, I would come in, people stopped saying hello to me, which is fine. It was like, I heard Ruby was here yesterday, why is Ruby not here today? So then Ruby became very much part of the family here for staff and for participants and for all the youth. And then just a month ago, I think we had 8 dogs here that were part of staff and participant dogs all at one time. So they become part of our chosen family as well.
It's cats.
I mean, it's interesting because a lot of people may say to choose your family, that sounds like a bit of an ideal situation, right? Sometimes there's a lot of complications, but the reality is that it's not. It's out of often rejection from their biological family, so it's actually not a position, a sort of a positive position to be in. And we need to really talk about this and find new platforms. And speaking of platforms, and I like to do sort of my research. And Jill, I looked at your Twitter, and your cover photo has you with a megaphone, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And so my question to you is you found sort of a platform, and you have a powerful, you're in a position to sort of voice. And I wonder for all these youth that don't have that sort of metaphorical or literal megaphone, how do they speak out, and how do they sort of get heard in the community?
You know, if I can just backtrack and sort of situate myself. First of all, I'm so honored to be on this panel with esteemed folks such as all of you. You know, I've had many years in the education system as a child and youth worker. I was a high school teacher. I was a student equity program advisor with the Toronto District School Board. And I cannot say enough how important equity groups, gay straight alliances, any organization, any group, student-led organization in schools were to help amplify kids' voices, you know, and you know, when we see now that some of these groups are being targeted or aren't able to sustain themselves because of such gross education cuts, I cannot say enough how important it is for us to have those caring adults in place, for us to have spaces in our public schools where LGBTQ2+, queer, trans, gender non-conforming kids can shine and find that voice. So I think a lot of kids are finding their voices where they can in schools. They're finding their voices in local organizations. You know, I think back to even my own story, you know, of coming out, you know, publicly to my mom, not long ago, maybe 15, 14 years ago. And I think about, you know, showing up at Blackbird Youth at BQI. You know, I think about walking through the doors at the 519 And those places were where I found not only chosen family, but I found a voice, I found identity, you know? So I think, you know, kids are young people and even adults who are coming out later in life, you know, there are spaces, there are places, but what we need is someone to metaphorically or, you know, or literally or figuratively hold your hand and help you get there, you know? And we have to be able to use our voices. We have to be able to know that, you know, our existence is our resistance. I saw the poster on the wall,
to the right there,
you know? And we have to know that we are okay just the way we are, and we have a right to show up unapologetically. So in my position, you know, what I've tried to do as a new politician, I mean, a year and a half in, is invite as many young people as I can to Queen's Park. I go into communities, not only St. Paul's, but anywhere that has queer and trans and gender non-conforming youth, especially youth of color, Black youth, Indigenous youth, you know, because, you know, the nearer you are to the margin, you know, the more intersectional that identity is that we have to negotiate, is often the harder, you know, the mountain is to climb. And you just need help, you need support. And it does get better, but it only gets better with support. And we have to have support available for every single young person that needs it.
So it sounds like starting in, you know, in communities of youth, in the most natural sort of place for that to occur is in the education system, it sounds like. And it's interesting you say that, because I have to acknowledge, coming from a place of privilege, you would assume that you would have all the support in the private school system. But actually, when I was in high school, there was no Gay Straight Alliance in high school, and I graduated in 2008. So, I mean, this is only a new thing that we're starting to create these communities and create these spaces, and so does it really, would you say it starts with education? You have a lot of experience there, Mitzie. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I like Jill. I feel really great being here this morning, and I'm really here because Carol Osler sent me a note. From where she is, I needed to show up here today. So,
thank you, Carol.
That's why a chair was added to the panel. And Carol's been my dear friend for 2 decades. We met when she was on the board of directors of Toronto Community Housing Corporation, and I was the chief administrative officer. And looking at social and affordable housing and how essential it is to places to have housing affordability. It makes every difference when you have a safe place for people to live. And so that's how our friendship began. And you know, for me, the lens that I use in decision making, and it's carried me all the way through, is who's not at the table. And so when I was education minister, my deputies and, you know, officials came to me and they were thrilled because the graduation rate had reached an all-time high. And at the time it was 86.5%. And so they were celebrating that. And as I sat at the table, I said to them, I said, this is really great. And, you know, I'd just become education minister, so it wasn't like I was taking credit. But I said to them, I said, who's in the 14.5? Can you break that down for me? And they looked at me like, okay, here we are.
She's going to be trouble, isn't it?
Yeah, here we are, you know, celebrating this incredible achievement. And you're asking us to break down the 14.5. And I really was, because I wanted to understand who wasn't graduating and why. And what happened was the data really told us. It was racialized youth, it was youth with disability, it was Indigenous youth, it was youth in the care of children's aid and foster care, and it was LGBTQ plus youth. And so I said to them, I said, well, it seems like these are groups of people. So there's nothing wrong with our students. It's a system that must change to support students. And that was a challenge. The first group that we immediately injected resources into was kids in care. Because there were these arbitrary rules that if your school had to align with where you live, well, by definition, if you're in foster care, you move a lot. And so why would you pull a student away from the caring people in their lives at school when the home life isn't what it should be? Didn't make any sense. And so we provided a $20 million, we had to go to cabinet and get approval. And it was so that if a student in care had to move, which happened often, they had the right to stay in the school, even if we had to get them in a taxi or an Uber, whatever it is, and get them to school. Because it was more important to have those caring people in their lives than to abide by an arbitrary rule. And so I share that story with you because sometimes we think that these systems are unmovable, but they can be moved. Look at the student protests that happened when the sex ed curriculum was taken out, right? It was actually very irresponsible. And I think that we are still experiencing some of the effects of that to create safety, sense of belonging, sense of inclusion, and then all of a sudden it's no longer okay for a year, and then you put that back in. It's very irresponsible. But I was so proud of our high school students and the leadership that I saw, that they stood up. I remember the day 140,000 of them walked out of class and said, no, we deserve better than this. So what I see with Chosen Family Day, Jan, is that it's the start of something big. That's what today and the launch of this for February 22nd is. It's the start of something big. It's something that can spread, that we can talk about, and that creates much more of a sense of safety for people just in our society, whether they're in school or just, existing in society. Right. So it's really powerful. It's a very, very powerful stance. I see my good friend Sherry Durnover is here, and there's a proverb that says that God places us in families. Families. Not just one, but families. And so anytime we have the opportunity to create that place where people feel that they belong, that they are included, that they are able to just be themselves, whether that's in a hospital or healthcare services, we have to be able to do that. And wherever we see injustice, we need to correct it. I don't care how big it is in terms of the change. Whatever you gotta move it so that people feel part of their community.
Right. No, that's very powerful, and I think you're right. It does start here, and and thank you to everyone who's chosen to take time out of their day to come here, because I can't help but feel optimistic, especially with the group of people that we have in this room and up here to my left. That this is going to be the start of something great with the support we have here, particularly the support of Mr. Ed Clark, who's a very dear mentor of mine. And so I want to ask you, Ed, why is this so important to you? I know we obviously talk about the needs from a social service side and a government side, but why is this important to you?
I guess in simple terms, because it's right. I try to always say to people, say to my kids, people spend so much time trying to figure out whether to do the right thing, instead of saying, just do the right thing and then figure out how you're going to manage whatever happens. When I led diversity at TD Bank, it was a very simple concept. Every one of our employees, indeed every one of our customers, has the right to be their best selves, to feel that they can be themselves. And that's a terribly important right, and to take that right away from people is a terrible thing. And then I think what you discover often when you I'd say I kind of stumbled. I mean, I literally stumbled into this. I told this story. Canada Trust, going through the benefits, and then I said, this was the early 90s. No one had done this. And I said, well, what happens if you're a same-sex couple? And he looked at me like, what? Why would we care? Like, why would we get benefits of that? And then fast forward, I arrived at TD, and I said, okay, we have 50,000 employees at the time. I said, okay, so how many are taking same-sex benefits? And they said, 50. And I said, no, you mean 5,000, 500, but you're not 50. Yep, 50 out of 50,000. So I had to stand up in front of my organization and say, like, I'm shamed. Like, I am running a homophobic organization, and I didn't even know it. And that's a pretty terrible thing to find out, that you weren't doing the right thing. And so what that says is that, if you really do care about the right thing, you have to be more than just passively caring about the right thing. You have to actually be proactively caring about the right thing. And it's probably one of the things, again, that you kind of learn is you say, yeah, but I'm, an ally, what can an ally do? And gradually over time I learned, well, allies actually matter. And that, in the organization, when you run a big organization, you say things and people always look at you and say, this too will pass. Whether it's running for office or whatever, but I don't take this too seriously. But it was when we started to put these big posters on the Pride Parade, we were the first bank to support the Pride Parade. People said, my God, he's advertising that TD supports this. This is like no retreat land. You have to really be engaged. And so you gradually see that you can make a difference. But I think then you get something like this and you go, wow, I mean, this problem is unbelievably deep and needs people to do stuff. And we have to mobilize all of us, the society, to make it right. One of the most emotional experiences I had was when we did that video, Make It Better. And so the video was sort of an in thing in North America at the time. And so our TD had a whole set of families speak about their family and how the family supported them, but the difficulties they had going to school and going to work. It's called Make It Better, and the main message was to try to reach out to people who are traumatized because of what's going on and say, it's not your fault. It's society's fault. It's these stupid people with stupid prejudice that have no place in society. So don't take this on yourself. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt. And it does hurt. But you should know, and that's what I think this is about, is there's we didn't use the word at that time, family. But there are people that care that you don't even know about. And there are families out there that want to help you. And so, we, and it's both members of the community and allies, we're going to make it better. Trust us. We will try to make it better. And I think that's what Friends of Ruby is about.
I think that's a good, that Make It Better tagline is very powerful, and kind of reminds me of yours, the change we need, right? So make it better. This is the change that we need, as you know. Kristyn, you've done some great partnerships, and you're really good at kind of bringing parties together and making things happen. How do we sort of mobilize all of this, and how do we wrap our heads around this? Make it bigger. How do we make it better?
Let's scale it up.
How do we make it better?
Export it.
Yes,
Yeah, no, this is actually pretty emotional, just hearing this incredible collection of stories. And it's oftentimes transpired over time. Personal coming of age, emotional development. The journeys are not short, and oftentimes they're quite personal. I think what I really draw from the experience here is that National Coming Out Day, to actually even see it recognized, is quite extraordinary, especially since so many of us have already been engaged in these intimate conversations with people who we randomly have met who have become friends, who then eventually become, potentially lovers, but, chosen family, whoever that is, and however we decide to co-organize and cluster together, we choose actively, day in, day out, each other through love, through acceptance, the good and the bad. And I think that's a very powerful, transformative conversation that could really do more than just bring some sense of unity, break down isolation for LGBT kids, but it actually helps us as human beings to actually be able to think beyond ourselves, to actually hold faith in who we are, especially as a young person. Like I came out of the closet at age 16. My experience was not positive. I have beautiful, loving parents who are of the Buddhist faith, and everything I thought I knew about my family just disintegrated before my very eyes. And the compassion that they told me to always show others, they were not able to show myself at that moment in time. And that same night that I told them, I left the house and I didn't find it safe to be there. So I went to a friend's place, and from there were these moments of chosen family conversations. I didn't even call chosen family. I just thought they were friends who were giving me refuge. And the reconciliation to getting back with my parents was years long, and it was painstaking, but not closing the door on my family, who I had to re-choose to be my family again, was quite transformative. I had to evolve as a human being to learn to forgive, to learn to love, and to learn to understand where they stood on the other side of the fence. And the beauty of this particular conversation, I think, for all of us and those who are not in the room today, is that we get to actively choose whether they're your biological family, if they have harmed you, if they have grieved you, if there's a path to reconciliation and forgiveness, we can choose them once again, and they can choose us once again. And then there is the connection of human beings across the many places that we move through in the world, whether it's work or places of faith, and school and beyond. We get to choose them. So you asked, how do we make it better, and how do we get it better? And I think we scale it up. I'm going to use borrow the language from the tech sector, innovation. We scale it up and we export the heck out of this thing. Because it is so powerful. And I think people are starving for this. People are starving for a conversation around love, community, and family. Especially if we don't oftentimes feel faith in ourselves. There's somebody else that believes in us.
Meaningful, like the story that Lucy told around Ruby and that young person who really, this was a safe place, but they weren't yet safe. And it took the friendship of Ruby to create that sense of safety. Like, I think it's important to explain it and to explain the vulnerability, because that's how people connect.
And this place is so important, and I wish there were more models like it in Canada, and I think that's why what we're doing here is so important, because we are going to set an example, and there's so much need in the whole Toronto community. Even people coming here and saying, I have a child that just come out, and I don't know what to do, and I'm a parent and I can kind of afford resources. Where do I go? And the reality is there isn't spaces, even if you can pay for it. And our model is obviously is not paid for, but the need is there across the whole ecosystem. And so, we really need to find ways to amplify this and raise awareness and raise support. And Ed and I are trying to do that in most in every avenue we know how to. But this does require a lot of resources, Ed. Can you kind of speak to some of the resources that we need? Money, time. What does it take to run a place like this?
You don't want to know. But to start, I think everyone knows we're really running two things, but they're combined.
Right.
And one is to run the counseling center here, but two, to have a house That's a safe house in a sense, a transition house, plus emergency beds. Because one of the things when we started, we started on this journey like 5 years ago. Helen Kennedy, came to me and said, that 30 to 40% of the kids on the street are LGBT? And I, well, no, and said, and I had done a project called Homeward Bound, which takes women out of shelters and sends them back to school and then guarantees them a job and solves the problem that you have, because we did it in a place where then when they get that job, they can stay in the same school district. So she said, typical Helen fashion, build me one of those places. And so I said, well, you can't know whether to build one of these places until we know what we have, what's the problem. So why don't we start immediately doing counseling and then we can start building. And I do think we've learned an enormous amount. First off, I don't think any of us 5 years ago understood the extent of the trans issue. And there was people, you can be members of the community or not members of the community, doesn't mean you understand everything. And I think that was a problem, that was just their issue that we hadn't realized. And it's your double intersection of marginalization is, the more complicated the marginalization, then the more often more difficult the question. And so we did start to build the counseling center and get, and we moved several different places. We used to be in quite a small place, then moved to another place. And then luckily we decided, okay, well, we need a serious place because the number of kids coming in, you get 25 new kids every month. You got to have a lot of resources here. You have to have a lot of spaces, and we continue. We're looking at hiring more counselors because we just need more people because the demand is so high. But then we also need in place, one of the things that we discovered is you can't send those kids to a hotel room by themselves. That is the chance of a really bad outcome that are very high, and so therefore we did need that. And we also know that there are kids that, a lot of kids are precariously housed, but they have a friend or an uncle or stuff like that. But there will be kids that you got to say, we got to figure out how to transition those kids so they come out and get their life settled down and deal with the trauma. And that's why the house, and then we have to integrate them because the kind of counseling for the people in this house is slightly different than the counseling that we're doing here. And then, we've introduced BIPOC days here. And suddenly we realized, okay, so for certain groups of the community, they don't totally feel comfortable with us. And so how do we get them to come and feel comfortable? So, I think in any business, people who tell you they had a brilliant plan and they execute it and that's why they have a great business are lying. Most people, when you start a business, you have an idea what you're doing and then you're constantly learning. So I know 5 years from now, we'll be doing a lot different things than we're doing now, but they all do require resources. It's not a terrible, I think, sometimes I get angry at how little the government supports us. Although, in the case of the building, the federal government put up $4.3 billion, so that's not jump change, there. And originally the Ford government stopped funding us, and now they come back and now are funding us. And basically I pitched them and said, well, we split this 50-50. I'll find the donors to do half and you do half. And so I do think that's educating, and that's one of the things that I've learned in doing philanthropy. It is a lot easier to sell people an idea if they can see it.
And I think this house is going to be such a great asset to the community. And you talked a lot about, how a huge disproportionate amount of the population in the community is homeless. And I think that really hit home for me when my mom kind of was in the Rosedale area. So at Bloor and Sherbourne, there's two sides of the bridge. And a lot of people from the Rosedale side said, don't walk on one side of the bridge. The other side is where a lot of homeless people are under the bridge. Don't walk on that side. And I remember I deliberately decided to go on that side of the bridge where there was homeless people, and hit home for me that, a disproportionate amount of them were probably from the LGBT community. And so I think we need to have people that are walking on that side of the bridge more often, and I think that we need to show people that they do deserve a home, and this home that we're building and hoping to launch very shortly, although not soon enough, is going to make such a difference. And so I just want to wrap up the panel today by just asking each of you, if you had 30 seconds and you were walking over that bridge and talking to one of those kids and kind of say down in 30 seconds, what would you say to them? What would you say to them?
So I loved your visual of going on the other side of the bridge. That's what we should always do every day, that we think about who we are and our view of the world. Just go on the other side of the bridge and discover, because when you embrace difference, you learn, you become better, right? And so I think that we have to challenge ourselves to do that in every possible way. LGBTQI to us, it's just a matter of allowing people to be themselves wherever they are in society. And where there are barriers set up to that, they need to be taken down and removed. And so I really think that's a very powerful challenge, and it's very easy for us. We hear a lot of things, and I know all the people in this room, you guys are highly immersed in lots of things, but how I frame it is who is not in the room. And I do that because a lot of times I'm dealing with policy, and you have to bring people into the room who are kept outside, and make sure that their voices are at the table and that they are the authors of anything that will impact their lives.
Lucy, 30 seconds, if you had a member of the community in front of them, what would you say?
I think I would say, if you don't have a chosen family yet, to come and join us at Friends, and that even if it's just a warm cup of coffee or a counseling session or in our group or a connection, that we can become your chosen family.
That was beautiful. My goodness. I'm still thinking about my answer, but I think on sight, if I walked across that bridge and I saw someone and I thought or they identified as, I would say, first of all, that you are good enough just the way you are. You are enough. I would say that there's nothing disordered about you. There's nothing wrong about you. There's nothing broken about you in society that's disordered and wrong and broken. And I would say, do you want to come with me? You know what I mean? And they may say no, and that's okay. Because I think as well too, when you're an ally or when you're in a community, especially when you are an ally that's not part of the community, you do not know the answers. The answers rest with community. You may be more refined, more polished, you may have more access to resources, but it's really about listening to community and meeting community where they are. So I think I would extend a hand and we take it from there. I just want to say about Friends of Ruby, this is a beautiful program. I'm feeling warm and excited. Thank you, Ed, as well for your support. I've been a customer for decades. And what I want to see, I just want to see houses sprouting everywhere, because so many kids, especially those kids that come from lower income families, indigenous, racialized, Black, whatnot, disabled, it's about accessing the resources, even when there is that uncut ruby, They got to get on that train or get on that subway or get on that go. And I often just wish that services were literally in their backyard. And that will be the dream. And I really hope that provincially, we talk about federal investment, provincially, you've mentioned our premier has come to the table. He needs to tell Ontario that he's come to the table.
Oh, I know that he's going to go that far.
22 plus young people and adults, because provincially currently, we're being erased by policy. We're not going to be erased, we're not going to be silenced, but we need policies and laws that push us and center our stories and center our existence. Because we're here and we ain't going nowhere.
Kristyn, any final words?
That'll be a very powerful conversation and a personal one for me, because I have been homeless and have been involved in that particular space. I think I would say to that person, I see you, I hear you, I have been you, you matter, have faith, it will and can get better, and go find your chosen family. You can start with Ruby.
Thank you. That's very powerful. Thank you. Thank every one of you for taking time today and being so vulnerable, as Herbert said. And this is a place of vulnerability. And in that spirit, I think I'll close by saying how much of a pleasure and privilege it was to moderate this panel today. And admittedly, it is actually the first panel that I've ever moderated. So it will be a memorable one at the very least. And
we didn't know.
Yeah, you didn't know. I wanted to save that to the very end. Save that to the very end and say how much of a privilege it really was, and I'm so humbled by all the comments. So I just want to wrap up by saying thank you to Sid Lee, who's been instrumental in a lot of our marketing initiatives here, as well as Citizen, and Bayer for the support later today. We have tons of activities going on today, lots of things going on tomorrow, February 22nd, hashtag Chosen Family Day, and visit chosenfamilyday.ca to know more about them. Really, really excited for this to take off, and tomorrow is the day that it really takes off. So thank you again for coming.
Terrific.
Thank you.